Welcome to another edition of Detroit Table Talk. Guys, guess what? I'm on time today, okay? It wasn't 5-ish today. Baby, we on time today. We got to take care of some business. So I just wanted to say that. I want to thank all my guests that have come out in the month of November and December. You guys have been such a blessing to me and such a blessing to the audience. November and December has been pretty much mental illness awareness months. We've had people come to the table to deal with traumas of the woman, then trauma of a man, and then how to deal with trauma in a relationship. And we're back at the table today with a special guest. I feel like I'm open. It's airy with a special guest, Mr. Kevin Fischer.
Mm-hmm. Fischer. Yep.
Fischer? Is it
yep.
Fischer?
It's just Fischer. The C is silent.
Is the C is silent? Okay. Mr. Kevin Fischer. So today we're talking to the executive director of NAMI, and that's the National Alliance of Mental Illness.
Correct.
Now, you didn't start off as the executive director.
No. I started with NAMI as a volunteer.
Okay.
And be honest, I don't even know how I ended up here. Just one thing led to another. And there was a need to fill the role as executive director. Believe it or not, I took the position in April of 2014 on an interim basis for the whopping salary of $1 a month. And
so you was really volunteering.
Yeah, well, NAMI is such a great resource.
It is.
That I didn't want the state of Michigan to lose it. And we had fallen into a place where there was the possibility of closing the NAMI affiliate here in Michigan. Okay. And I couldn't let that happen. So I volunteered. I said, I'll do it until we can find somebody else. And of course, 10 years later, I'm still here. But I love it. I always tell people, this is work. God chose me for this work.
Absolutely.
I didn't choose this. God chose me for it. I love it. I'm appreciative of it every day. It's not always easy because I have to relive the trauma of losing my son every day. But it's a sacrifice that I'm willing to make. And it may sound cliche to some people, but if it helps somebody else and if it prevents somebody else from experiencing the tragedy my family experienced, I'll do it every day until I die.
Now, is that when you really, although you were a volunteer when you started off, when you lost your son in 2007?
Well, I lost him in 2010. So Dominique, my oldest son, Dominique, was 20 years old in 2007 when he was diagnosed with bipolar disorder and schizophrenia. Okay. And it came as a complete surprise to our family. His mom and I had divorced about a year prior. He was away at college, John Carroll University down outside of Cleveland. And from what we knew, he was doing very well academically, socially. We hadn't seen any signs of mental illness with him. He came home for Thanksgiving break 2007 and was just rambling about God working for him and taking over the world. And it was just all these grandiose thoughts. And his mom and I thought, maybe he went off to school, experimented with drugs, was having a bad reaction. So we took him to a local hospital to have him drug tested. And after a lengthy exam, the doctor said, there's no drugs or alcohol in his system, but we're going to put him on a 72-hour psychiatric hold, which was like hitting a brick wall at 1,000 miles an hour because, again, we hadn't seen any symptoms of mental illness with him. Okay. So his initial diagnosis was schizophrenia, and a few months later, they added the diagnosis of bipolar disorder. And we quickly learned, frankly, how ignorant we were to mental illness, what he was experiencing, what treatment plan would look like, really what his life was going to look like going forward. And so we floundered for 2.5 years trying to figure it out, trying to figure out the medications, how to keep him engaged in treatment. And he was really doing very well until more people learned about his diagnosis. Okay. And they did what I call stigmatized him. They made him feel weak, made him feel bad about his diagnosis. And so in early 2010, I noticed that he stopped taking his medication. He stopped going to therapy. And in I want to say February, March, I was doing his laundry and I found a small bag of marijuana in his pants pocket. And I was really upset about it because not only am I anti-drug, but I knew that was not going to be beneficial to his treatment or his situation. And so the next time we went to his psychiatrist, I was like, why are you using marijuana? He said, well, Dad, it makes the voices go away. And I said, well, yeah, so did the prescription medication you were taking. And he literally told me, he said, I would rather people think I'm high than for them to know that I'm taking medication for mental illness.
But you know, a lot of people feel that way. Yeah. They keep their medication a secret.
Over half the people in the United States that have substance use disorder have underlying mental health disorders, whether they've been diagnosed or not. And we call that self-medicating. Yeah. These are people who say, I would rather, similar to Dominique, I'd rather self-medicate with drugs or alcohol than take prescription medication, or I've never been diagnosed, but I know something's going on with me. I'm drinking because I'm trying to avoid the depression or the anxiety, or like Dominique, I'm smoking or doing other drugs because it makes the voices go away. And the issue with Dominique, as his psychiatrist explained to me, much to my surprise, she said, well, you're both kind of right. She said, the marijuana will help make the voices go away. However, they will return in greater frequency and greater intensity. And there will come a time that the marijuana won't be strong enough and he will graduate to stronger drugs. And then you have a person living.
Now, was he just doing the marijuana at this time, or he was taking his medication and marijuana?
He stopped taking his medication. Okay. So he was just drinking alcohol and smoking marijuana. Okay. And so his psychiatrist explained to us, now you'll end up with a situation where we call a co-occurring diagnosis. He still has the mental illness, but now he has a drug problem. Yeah. And that's like pouring gasoline on a fire. Yeah. But there's so much we didn't know. Dominique was an adult. He was 23 years old. And I didn't know what options I had. I know more about things that are available now that maybe we'll get into later. But I simply told him, you can't bring drugs into my house. Because at the time, my current wife and I were living together. We had 2 other minor children. And, that's part of the reason. But I didn't want drugs in my house. I don't support that. And so Dominique made the choice as an adult to leave. Okay. And, But he didn't leave to go back to school. No, he didn't leave to go back to school. He went to live with his mom and then ultimately moved in with an uncle of his who frankly had some intellectual and developmental disabilities. And Dominique knew basically if he lived with his uncle, he could do what he wanted to do. It would be unregulated. Yeah. But unfortunately, 3 months later, June 27th of 2010, we lost him to suicide. So I'm a retired business person. I have full disclosure. I'm not a psychiatrist, psychologist, or social worker. I'm an advocate and an activist. But you've learned a lot along the way. Well, yeah, you pick up. I'm amazed at how much I picked up along the way. And again, I think it's a blessing and a privilege to be able to share that with others, because I don't want people to experience what we experienced with Dominique. And I don't want to lose another person. So let me ask you a question. When Dominique was over in college, now, you said you didn't have any red flags to say that he was dealing with mental health issues. Because the mind is so fragile, do you think that him being in college, the extra load of stress and work, that kind of just... It is very possible. What's interesting is we know 50% of all lifetime cases of mental illness onsets or begins between the ages of 14, or by the age of 14. 75% by the age of 24. So, and Dominique was in that sweet spot, especially for young men, particularly African American men. That is between the ages of 18 and 22 are when we're most susceptible to schizophrenia. Right. So he was 20 when he was diagnosed. He fell right in that sweet spot. But part of what you just said can be true too. Kids are under so much stress now, and those can be triggers. We don't know all the causes for mental illness. You know, when we took him to the doctor and when he was first diagnosed, they asked us if it was a history of mental illness on either his mom's or my side of the family. And our immediate side of the families, there was none. Yeah. So it can be hereditary. It can be trauma induced. We live with a lot of drama and trauma in our lives. That can trigger mental illness. Substance use can trigger mental illness. Closed head injuries can trigger mental illness. There are more causes for mental illness than we can identify. And so we can only imagine what happened with Dominique.
When you think about mental illness and not you per se, but individuals being diagnosed, what are some of the things that you tell parents to look out for in their children?
So some of the early warning signs are increased worried, increased sadness, increased paranoia, increased risky behavior like drug abuse or driving erratically, changes in people that they hang out with, no longer finding joy in things that once brought you joy, whether you were into music, sports, you become more withdrawn. Yeah. All of those can be triggers. Changes in eating habits, changing in sleep habits. One of the things that I look back, it's ironic, you know, I relive Dominique every day. One of the warning signs that I wasn't aware of was change in hygiene habits. You know, Dominique, I always tell people, Dominique was very particular about his appearance. Dominique was an athlete. He played 3 sports. So he practiced, you know, all the time. Dominique would shower 2 or 3 times a day. He wanted to smell good, look good, always wanted his hair cut. Dominique, this is not politically correct to say nowadays, but Dominique's definition of cross-dressing was wearing Nike and Adidas at the same time. Right. You know, he would tell me, he's like, Dad, he's
you
like,
can't wear both.
Yeah,
you just got to pick one side.
He's like, Dad, you can't wear Adidas socks with Nike shoes. You got to put one or the other on. But he was very particular about that. But in his illness, one of the things we noticed is that he didn't care about getting his hair cut. He didn't shower. He wasn't brushing his teeth. And every day, you know, as a father who was uneducated about mental illness, we would argue and fight because I was like, how do you not know all of a sudden that you need to get up and brush your teeth and take a shower every day? Yeah. I didn't realize that was a symptom of the illness.
Especially if he was going into a depression. You know, it's strength just to get up to even want to take a shower and brush your teeth.
Well, and bipolar disorder it's tough because bipolar disorder, we used to call it manic depression, where people experience extreme highs and lows. And so Dominique would go through phases where, if you want to call it the depression, where he didn't get out of bed for days. Yep. But he would also go through periods of mania where Dominique could stay up for a week with no sleep, just knock out task after task after task, and just be running at 1,000% all the time, which was really scary. And so he experienced a lot of that. And then when you're diagnosed, and then you go through this process of trying to figure out what we call the correct cocktail of medications. And people have to understand, you and I can be diagnosed with the same, let's call it bipolar disorder, but our medication regime could be very different. Yeah. And it's very frustrating to go through that process, that trial and error.
Yeah, because it's a process of elimination.
Yeah, because it's not an exact science. So it's what dosage works right for me. First of all, and we call it cocktail of medication because it's not, you know, you watch these commercials now and sometimes we're led to believe that if you just take this one pill, it's going to fix everything.
It's not like that.
Well, you and I may be both prescribed, let's say, Abilify, but your dosage could be very different than mine, or Abilify may not work for me. They may have to try something else with me and then play with the dosages. And so you go through this very lengthy trial and error, but while you're going through that, there's side effects.
Yes.
I can't sleep. I'm overeating. I don't have an appetite. It may impact my liver and
walking around looking like a zombie, like you're in the days.
And so
moving slow.
It's tough. Most people don't realize in the United States, there is on average an 11-year delay from the first symptoms of mental illness and a person getting treatment. 11 years. That's the average. Now think about that. You got cancer and it's 11 years before you get treatment.
You're on the back end.
You in a lot of trouble.
Yeah.
And so, but there are lots of reasons for that. There's stigma. People, and let's just be honest about it. Mental illness doesn't discriminate. It doesn't care if you're black, white, rich, poor, Republican, Democrat, urban, suburban, don't care. Mental illness doesn't discriminate. Neither does stigma. But stigma varies by community and culture. The stigma of mental illness in the black community is very different than it is in the white community. It's different than it is in the Muslim community. It's different than it is the Arab community. It's even different between men and women, people who are religious or not. Stigma is tough. Let's
talk about some of those stigmas in the black community. What are some of the major?
Well, the first one is very simply, we ain't gonna let nobody tell us we crazy. It's just that simple. I always like to use
suggesting that they go sit and talk to somebody, suggest that they're crazy.
Oh yeah, you're not gonna tell me I'm crazy. You're not gonna tell me I have to go see a psychiatrist. You're not gonna tell me I got to see a shrink. I got to lay on the couch. You're gonna tell me I'm cray cray. All of this other stuff. But here's the thing. We have to understand mental illness is a medical diagnosis. It is not a weakness of character. It's not a weakness of faith. It's not because you're a bad person. And I am a believer. But you can't pray mental illness away. And I'm working with a group of faith leaders now. Because
I was just about to ask you that, because I know when I was one of the leaders in my church, we actually had to sit down and talk to the pastor and say, listen, we got a lot of people that are coming into church that has mental health issues. We have to address those issues.
There are so many people who are suffering in silence. So I'm a member of Triumph Church, and I love my church. And up until about a year and a half ago, I served on the security ministry. And so I saw everybody coming in, and it broke my heart to stand there and watch mothers walk their kids down to the front row. And you can look into the eyes of these kids and know they're experiencing some kind of behavioral health challenge. And the parents are sitting there praying for healing. And what they don't understand is in the room, and I say this with humility, I'm the head of NAMI, the nation's largest grassroots mental health advocacy organization. I'm standing right in front of you, but you don't know who I am. 5 rows behind you at the location that I go to is Eric Doa. Eric Doa is the CEO of Detroit Wayne Integrated Health Network, the largest public behavioral health care agency in the state of Michigan outside of the actual Department of Health and Human Services. He attends the church. He's sitting 5 rows behind you. Rows behind him is Michael Garrett, president and CEO of CNS Healthcare. I was like,
man,
what you're
no
praying
excuse.
For is
it's in the room.
Your healing is in the room, but nobody knows it. And so I encourage faith leaders. And if you are a faith leader listening to this, or if you go to church tomorrow, encourage your faith leader to say, we need to talk about this. We need our faith leaders to publicly say it's okay to get mental health care, because many of them know. Some of them are resistant, but many of them know this is not demonic.
I was just about to say my position on it too. We have to stop making it where it's demonic, where we only can pray it away. Listen, God has given us people, that can be of service to us. Let's use those people. And I tell people all the time, you turning around 3 times and saying it's gone, it's going to be right there when you turn around, that 3rd time. You jumping, and saying, I'm leaving it behind me. That's not going to work.
No. Well, and I tell people, so a good friend of mine is a pastor. His name is Terrence King. He's from here in Detroit, but he pastors a church in Lansing, Michigan. And Terrence and I host an annual, we call it the the intersection of faith and mental health care every year at his church. And we held an event a few years ago where we had a group of faith leaders in, and they were from all denominations. It was an interfaith event. And I had a pastor who was adamant that mental illness is demonic. We pray it away. He even talked about exorcisms.
You know how many pastors I communicate with that say the same thing?
So I asked him, he came up to me during one of the breaks and he just said, I'm not on board with you. And I was making the case that you just made. God provides us with psychiatrists and psychologists just like he provides us with cardiologists and oncologists.
And pastors.
Exactly. So I said to this pastor, I said, look, let me ask you something. If you started to experience the symptoms of a heart attack right now, would you like me to drop to my knees and pray? Because I'm willing to do that. Or you want me to pull this phone out of my pocket and call 911? And he thought long and hard for about 15 seconds. And he looked up at me and he said, Brother Fischer, I want you to call 911 first. Then I want you to pray. And by the end of the day, as we were wrapping the conference up, he came to me. He said, I've been thinking about you all day. And he said, you got me thinking about this thing a different way now.
Great.
We have to open up, and I call it prayer plus. I'm all about praying. I'm good with that. But use the tools that God made available to it. It's right in front of you. And then we have, and I'm not blaming all the faith leaders either, because again, because of the stigma in our community about mental illness, those people are coming into church and they're not going to their faith leader and saying, you know what, this is what's going on. And those faith leaders then directing them to the resources. And then myself as an advocate and all of the providers out here, we have to do a better job of educating not only faith leaders, but the community as a whole about what resources are available and how to access them. I always tell people the stigma is the leading barrier to the early diagnosis and treatment that leads to better outcomes. We have to get past the stigma. But once we get past that, once a person is willing to get help, then we need to make sure the public is aware of where that help is and how to access that help. Because in many situations, we only get 1 or 2 attempts with a family. First of all, they didn't want to do it anyway. And then when you give them the runaround, when you bounce them from 800 number to 800 number, or when they call and they say, okay, I'm ready for help now. You say, well, you can't get an appointment for 6 months. That don't work.
And right now, I think that's where we are. We're like 6 months out for a psychological exam.
Well, it depends on how you go. And again, I so much appreciate being here with you today, because we have more resources available than most people know. There is something Senator Stabenow from Michigan and Senator Roy Blunt from Missouri about 6 years ago created something called Certified Community Behavioral Health Centers, or CCBHC. And it is a game changer when it comes to accessing behavioral health care. It is the most significant mental health legislation of our lifetime. And what it does, quite simply, is they establish these centers where anyone who is experiencing a behavioral health care issue, so it could be mental illness, substance use, even intellectual developmental disabilities, you can go into one of these centers and they will provide you with high quality behavioral health care, regardless of the severity of your diagnosis, regardless of your insurance status, and regardless of your ability to pay. So it literally takes pay off the table. And these are not startups. These are not inexperienced. And that's stuff that we need
to know.
Exactly.
Because I know for a minute, I've been saying, man, I just really want to go and sit down and talk to somebody. And I pay good money for my insurance, but they don't allocate any sessions.
So here's what's really interesting about that. And you reading from my playbook. So here's what most people don't realize. You can have great health insurance from your employer. You can have the best out there. sometimes that's the barrier when you're experiencing behavioral health care. If you're Medicaid eligible, which means you are on the lower income spectrum, that's where community mental health comes into play. The state of Michigan spends almost $4 billion a year on public behavioral health care services. So if you call Detroit Wayne Integrated Health Network or Oakland Community Health Network or Washtenaw County, they can connect you with resources where you're not waiting 6 months for an assessment.
Okay.
As a matter of fact, if you're a CCBHC, they have minimum guidelines. They can't keep people out there waiting for 2 weeks to get an assessment. And they provide high quality, and I want to stress this, high quality behavioral health care. These are not startups. These are not people who are not the best of the best. This is organizations like CNS Healthcare, like the Children's Center, like the Guidance Center. In Southeast Michigan, there are almost 40 CCBHCs, and all you have to do is contact your local community mental health. So if you're in Wayne County, it's Detroit Wayne Integrated Health Network. If you're in Oakland County, it's Oakland Community Health Network. If you're Macomb County, it's Macomb Community, and so on.
Now, can they call the United Way and they?
It's not a United Way agent. I don't
connect them with it.
United Way may, and I pause there because I don't do a whole lot of work with United Way.
Okay.
You can call the new National Crisis and Suicide Hotline. Is 988 that came online last July. But I recommend. Most of us, not everybody has access to the internet, but if you Google
star 988.
Yep, or star 988.
Okay.
You can contact and they can connect you with those resources in your community. And it's, like I said, it's literally the most impactful, useful legislation because this is not pie in the sky. I spend a lot of time in Lansing. I was just in Washington, D.C. a couple of weeks ago advocating for increased access to behavioral health care. And you hear people talk about legislation all the time, and it's normally something that may happen 10 years down the road, or it's something that works in theory but never is executed. CCBHC is live today, and it is helping people improve the quality of their life and saving lives today.
Now tell us what those acronyms.
CCBHC is Certified Community Behavioral Health Centers.
Okay.
And like I said, it's game changing for people. So don't think cost is the barrier to prevent you from getting the help that you need. You're not going to be on a 6 month waiting list. The biggest problem we have with CCBHC is not enough people know about it. And I was in Senator Stabenow's office a couple of weeks ago, and I said, guys, if we have to have a marketing campaign, we need to do whatever we need to do because mental illness is an epidemic in this country. And
I'm glad now that you see a lot of the police departments are on board. Now they are hiring social workers and advocates, to help them with the mental health issues out on the street.
So I wear a lot of hats. In addition to being the state executive director for NAMI Michigan, I'm also the president of an organization called CIT International, Crisis Intervention Team Training International.
Okay.
And we're the gold standard for training primarily law enforcement officers, but there are other first responders, EMTs, paramedics, even corrections officers on how to verbally de-escalate situations where people experience a behavioral health crisis and get them to help rather than, taking them to jail or harming them. Unfortunately, the Department of Justice released a study last year. They studied police shootings from 2015 to 2020. 25% of people who are shot and killed by law enforcement in this country every year have a diagnosed mental illness. And it's not because cops want to kill people. It's because they don't receive the training that they need.
Yeah.
They don't get that training in the academy. They don't understand how to recognize a person who's in a behavioral health crisis versus a criminal who's just being defiant.
So what is legislation doing to make that a part of the M-Codes certification?
So we're working on that right now. And actually I was on a call just yesterday. Right now, crisis intervention team training is voluntary. There's no legislation either in the state or federal that requires law enforcement agencies to receive that training. Many do voluntarily, but it's spotty. And so two things. One, we in the state of Michigan are in the process of establishing a state CIT or crisis intervention team training office so we can make sure we make it available to more agencies or more communities. Okay. But we also are starting to advocate on a federal level to make it required as well. Because here's the thing, where CIT started in 1988, and most people don't know, NAMI actually started crisis intervention team training in 1988 as a result of it was two separate situations in Memphis, Tennessee. Unarmed men who were experiencing behavioral health crisis were shot and killed by Memphis police. And the local NAMI affiliate there went to the police chief and the mayor and said, you can't execute people because they have mental illness. Yeah. You got to make this better. So that was what started what we now know as CIT International. But where CIT has been utilized across the country, it is proven to reduce injury to officers and civilians by up to 80%. So it works. But the problem is, again, it's voluntary, and there are over 17,000 law enforcement agencies in this country. Maybe about 5,000 have been CIT trained. Mm-hmm. And then the other problem we have since George Floyd, quite frankly, is the term CIT or crisis intervention has become so generic. I use the analogy, CIT has become to crisis response models as Kleenex is to tissue. Wow. If you sneeze right now, am I handing you a Kleenex or the CVS brand? And there's a world of difference because our model, the proven evidence-based CIT training model is a full 40-hour program where there's some classroom, but there's a lot of hands-on role play where we educate officers and we put them in situations. Detroit Wayne Integrated, I mean, many communities, because I don't want to just pick on one, we have organizations that do a great job with the training. I used to train with Detroit Wayne Integrated Health Network. We did a class a month, and the training, the role plays would get so real that we confiscated the officers' weapons and put them in a lockbox. Yes. Because I was like, you're not having no flashback and shooting me by mistake. Yep, absolutely. But we made it as realistic as we could because we want them to make mistakes in the classroom, not out on the streets. And we don't use actors, and you can't do it virtually. You have to be in the room so you can feel the intensity of somebody who might be experiencing suicidal ideation. So you can know what it's like to deal with a person who has schizophrenia, who the voices in their head won't allow them to comply with the demands or the commands of the officer. The voice is louder than the voice that you're telling them to come towards me or get on the ground. Exactly. So there is an actual part of the training. There's a proprietary program called Hearing Voices that we put the officers through. And it's written by a PhD doctor who actually lives with schizophrenia. And it puts you as close as we can into the head of a person who's living with schizophrenia. And we have these officers, about an hour program, and we have these officers put these headphones on, and they have to listen to these voices that are going in and out, saying things, and we ask them to complete tasks, read a story and answer a question, fill out a job application. You would be amazed at how often they can't complete the task. And the point of it is to say, you couldn't take it for an hour. Some of them don't last 15 minutes. But my son lived with it 24/7. Wow. And then when you approach him on the street, and my son did have an interaction with Cleveland police where they arrested him for being drunk. They charged him with being drunk and disorderly and resisting arrest. I'm so sick of that resisting arrest phrase. He was in a psychiatric crisis. And the resisting arrest, and this again is before I knew any of this stuff. Yeah. I remember when I went and saw my son in the Cuyahoga County Jail, the first thing I asked him was, what's with the resisting arrest charge?
See, a lot of people need to realize resisting arrest is not really resisting arrest. You know, an officer can tell you to turn around, and if you stop to ask a question, you're automatically resisting arrest.
And that's an officer who hasn't been trained properly.
Yeah.
And so they charged my son with that. But his response, Carmen, was, he said, "Dad, I thought they were there to hurt me. I wasn't fighting them. I was trying to get away."
Yeah.
From a threat, I'm not running away from the scene of crime. And just to put this in full context, my son was off his medication. The voices in his head told him to go to a Cleveland Browns football game at 5:00 in the morning. It was a Monday night game. So he bummed money because he had money, but he bummed bus fare down to the stadium. He was there all day and he got hungry. And he was accused of taking a hamburger or a hot dog off a tailgater's grill. They called the police. The police came, chased him down, and they roughed him up. When I saw my son in the Cuyahoga County Jail 4 days later, he still had a split lip. And again, he told me, and my son, I'm 6'5", 325 pounds. My son was 6'3", 170 pounds soaking wet. He wasn't trying to fight no cop. But the first thing he said, he was like, "Dad, I was trying to get away from what he perceived to be a threat." And so when I do CIT training, you know,
Now, before you tell us that, with the CIT training, have you had communication with like Chief White or Chief Barron so that they can learn it before they, you know, think about putting it out to their officers?
Well, here's the thing. Detroit police, first of all, most people don't realize Chief White is a licensed counselor.
Yes.
So he gets it.
Yes.
Detroit.
And that's why he's implementing a lot of the things that he
exactly.
is.
But even Chief Craig before him, because Chief Craig came to Detroit from Los Angeles Police Department, and they had already implemented CIT. So he started it. Chief White picked it up, frankly, and took it to the next level. But Detroit, in fairness, because law enforcement gets a bad rap.
They do. And sometimes it's warranted.
Yeah, sometimes it is. You know what? Here's the thing. Here's the thing. And I can't justify everything they do, but I'll tell you this. And this is from my own personal experience. 90% or more of the officers I come into contact with, black, white, urban, suburban, because I'm all over the place. Yeah. They're trying to do it right. They don't have the training. Yeah. And that's what we have to do. We have to make sure they are properly trained. Detroit Police Department in the last couple years have more CIT trained officers than any other department that I'm aware of. And
just to be fair too, Detroit police officers or Detroit Police Department officers are not like other officers in other states. You know, we don't have the police brutality numbers that a lot of states, you know, have.
Exactly.
And is experiencing.
Exactly. And I can tell you, I know Chief White personally. I consider him very much a friend. And Chief White will tell you, as a matter of fact, every time he and I...
Well, he ain't returned my call to come to the table, but hey, man.
I'll see what I can do.
Thank you.
I'll tell you this. And Chief White, he does this to me every time we appear publicly. One of the first things he says is, "Mr. Fischer calls me in good and bad." Yeah. And he takes my calls. And Detroit police have always been very open to bring me in and say, "Mr. Fischer, this is what happened. Yeah. This is the real of what happened. Here's the body cam." Because here's the thing we got to understand. What you see on the news is rarely the full story. That's right. And I'm not saying that to defend the police.
It's like clips on social media.
Exactly. It's not the full and I didn't understand that until I stepped into this public role. I didn't I always thought when people said my comment was taken out of context, I thought that was a cop out. I've been misquoted so many times, or I have made a comment right now and then a reporter will ask me a different question 2 or 3 minutes later, and when they edit it, they put those two things together and make it sound like I said something that I didn't say. So I get that. Yeah. But I will tell you, and I've seen multiple situations here in Detroit where Detroit police have been accused or it's been set up by what you see in the media that the situation was something that it's totally different when you see the raw footage and you see it in its complete context. One of my rules And sometimes reporters get frustrated with me because they'll call me and say, well, will you comment on the situation? If I wasn't there, or if I haven't seen the unedited body cam or dash cam, I can't comment on it because it's not fair.
Yeah.
And it potentially damages my credibility. If I go out and say DPD was wrong and I didn't see it all, then who am I?
And that's why I'm glad that Chief White has taken a position to release body cam faster than any chief has.
Yep.
You know, so that people won't get the wrong idea. And not only that, even when he does show the full footage, because of our, mental health status, you can see the proof in the pudding, and people still believe.
Well, because we want to. Because, I mean, that's part of the stigma, if you want to call it, of being a law enforcement officer. We're so set up to think bad of them. And again, I'm not making a blanket statement for all law enforcement officers.
Yeah.
I look at it like this. We got a few bad cops, like we got a few bad plumbers and a few bad mail people and garbage men and all of that. My challenge, and I have lots of friends in law enforcement across the country, my challenge to them is you need to root and weed those bad cops out because it's damaging to you and it's putting you in danger. Law enforcement officers want the community to give them the benefit of the doubt. Well, you got to help us do that. And I'm very blunt about that. Like I said, I have great respect for law enforcement officers. I have the privilege of engaging in them in a way that most people don't have. But there are things they need to clean up in their house too.
But I would say it starts from the inside out, because if me and you partners, I see what you're doing before anybody else do.
Well, and that's the other part is whatever happened, we need to get back to more community policing. We need to build those relationships in our communities so people get to know us better and can be more trusting. I grew up
and in that way, you saying that in that way, if I see or you see my son, because you've built a relationship with me and the family, you see my son out on the street and you know that he's experiencing mental health illness. You can say to your partner, wait, hold on.
I know
I know him. Let me call his mother. Let me talk him down, But because we don't have that relationship, it appears sometimes that we step into situations on the defense. Ready to just handle the situation without the full totality of the situation.
And unfortunately, that's human nature. Like I said, I don't know you. And what I see, I have great friends in the media too. And I try to be fair to them. But the media sensationalizes things. I'll give you an example. Every time there's a mass shooting in the United States, the first conclusion people jump to is that, well, he must have been mentally ill. Here's the facts. This is not my opinion. You can go to the Centers for Disease Control website. You can study this all day long. In the United States, people with diagnosed mental illness are responsible for less than 4% of all violence in this country. Less than 4%. The problem is almost 100% of that 4% shows up on the news, or people jump to the conclusion. So again, I'm going to come back to my term stigma. We are stigmatizing people that have a legitimate illness. My son, Dominique, never wanted to hurt anybody. But we want the public, or we set the public up to falsely believe that everybody with a mental illness is dangerous. And I hear leadership, politicians, I hear lots of people here, even in the city of Detroit, who keep saying we need to lock them up. We need to reopen Northville. We need to do all those things and lock people up. Now, let's have this conversation real quick too. Do we have enough psychiatric beds? No. But do we need to build 1,000 beds and start locking people up? No, that's not the answer either. 1963, John F. Kennedy, the last piece of the last piece of major legislation he signed was called the Community Mental Health Act of 1963. And it was the result of his sister who had mental illness. They put her in a hospital. They performed all kinds of experiments and lobotomies and stuff, and they literally killed that woman. Wow. And he instituted a commission to study it. And the result of that commission said, we need to allow people to receive treatment in their community, which is really where community mental health came from. Mm-hmm. Because they found that people recovered better in the community when they could be around their family and people who loved them, when they could get social supports like going to church and going to school and having a job. People recovered better than mm-hmm. being institutionalized. Mm-hmm. But we didn't act on it because Kennedy got assassinated, and we didn't act on it until the late 80s, early 90s, when we were going through a recession and governments were looking for a way to save money. And people, it was like finding new money in the back of a drawer. People say, hey, we can close Northville, we can close Eloise, we can close all these hospitals and save all this money. Kennedy's commission said, yeah, we can close some of them, but the savings was supposed to be reinvested into the community.
Into the community,
well, we took the savings and gave tax breaks and did other stuff with it. So if you recall, and I'm old enough, the late 90s, we experienced an explosion of homelessness across the state and across the country. It's because we sent all these people with mental illness home to families who didn't know how to deal with them, prepared. To an underfunded community mental health system that couldn't deal with them. Mm-hmm. And then I look at my own lived experience with Dominique, and I get it now. You end up in a situation where you have family members who just can't do it anymore. They don't know how to deal with you. Me and Dominique arguing about him brushing his teeth and stuff. And I'm saying, I don't know why you don't understand this. He's saying, why you keep yelling at me? Yeah. And so one of two things happen. Either I put him out because I think he's failing to follow my commands mm-hmm. or do as I ask him to do, or he says, you know what? I'd rather live on the street than keep getting yelled at.
And in their mind, and this is what a lot of people really need to understand. You can be talking as calm as you are right now, but in their mind, it's louder. Yeah. It's like surround sound. Yeah. So when they're saying, why are you yelling at me? And you're like, I'm just talking to you. Yeah. Yeah. You know, that's a trigger. Yep. You know.
Yep. And it's hard. I learned so much from that child in 2.5 years of that illness. You know, I remember him coming from the doctor one day. He was really frustrated. And I wasn't at that appointment. He had gone with his mom. And he said, I hate when people talk about me like I'm not in the room. Wow. And he said, Dad, I realized it took him a long time to accept his diagnosis. But he said, Dad, I realized I got this thing. He used to just call it a thing. He said, but that don't mean I'm stupid. Yeah. And most people don't realize some of the most intelligent, talented people that have ever walked the face of this earth live with mental illness.
Yes, they do.
Albert Einstein. Yep.
And most engineers.
Yeah. You have so many. I think about all the comedians or the artists who won't engage in mental health treatment because they're afraid the medications will dull their creative thinking or their genius. And so, but Dominique made that real for me. He helped me understand that. He's like, Dad, I'm not stupid. I understand what you said.
And that's one of the things that doctors should really consider when they are in the room talking to the patient and they have a support person in there. Don't look at the support person. Mm-hmm. Look at that individual and try to explain to them and ask them, do they have any questions? Involve them in their treatment.
Exactly. I made a deal with Dominique. I won't even call it a deal. I agreed to show him the respect that he deserved. When he pointed that out to me, I told him, I said, look, I will not disrespect you. I will not embarrass you in front of the doctor. I was taking Dominique to the doctor 4 days a week. I said, the only time I will intervene is when I know you're being dishonest with the doctor. Okay. When you're telling the doctor you're taking your medication when you're not, when you're telling the doctor you're sleeping when you're not. I said, those are the things that I will correct you on. I said, but I won't embarrass you. Okay. And I won't disrespect you like that. Mm-hmm. And, you know, it's challenging sometimes, especially with an adult, to get them to allow a family member to participate in their treatment.
Yeah.
And so, because it's a trust thing.
Yeah.
And so once you earn that trust, then you have to protect it. And I'm really, like I said, I'm so proud of him because he gave me that. Yeah. He signed a letter that I still have a scanned copy of where it says, my dad is my advocate. You can talk to him about everything and anything with my treatment. That. But I had to earn that from him. Yeah. And I tried to guard it as best I could. Mm-hmm. But I told him, if we're dishonest with the doctor, it's like taking your car to a mechanic. If I don't know what's broke, I can't fix it. Yeah. If you can't tell me what I'm not seeing, I can't fix it. I said, so, and I encourage people because I know taking mental health medication is challenging and stigmatizing for people. And I tell people, I'm not a pill pusher. Yeah. That is between you and your doctor. You and your doctor sit down and figure out what your treatment plan is. But if you trust your doctor, you got to trust the plan. Yeah. And if the doctor prescribes medication for you, then I encourage you to take the medication as prescribed. Thank you. Don't take it once a day when the
don't cut it in half.
Yep. When the bottle says take it 3 times a day, because here's what ends up happening, and most people don't realize, you're actually causing a side effect if you don't take it as prescribed. Yep. And then when you go to the doctor and you say, well, this is making me feel this way and that, the first thing they're going to say is, Kevin, are you taking it as prescribed? When I lie to them and say yes, now they're making an adjustment off bad information.
That's right.
So now I'm either overprescribed or underprescribed because I ain't telling them the truth.
That's true. That's true.
And I deal with that. I got a 92-year-old mother. I just left her house. I love my mama dearly. But she will split a pill in a minute. Or she's one of those people who she takes her medication until she feels good. And then she stops taking it. And I was like, you realize you were feeling good because you were taking it. I said, Mama, take the medicine as they prescribed it. And if it's causing you a problem, then let's go talk to them about that. But you can't stand there and the doctor say, well, Miss Fisher, are you taking your medication? You sitting there saying yes. And I know in the car you just told me you weren't taking it.
Yeah. So when we talk about mental health, let's kind of shift a little bit. We're in the holiday seasons or coming out of the holiday season. I would have loved to had you at the table before Thanksgiving, but you're here now, and I am so honored. I'm so honored. I never thought that I would be able to get you at the table. Now, I met you prior, some years ago. I met you some years ago.
Accessible.
I was doing Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated mental health event, and I went and I sat and I listened to you, and I was so amazed at the information, the wealth of information that you were giving us. How attentive you was, and how careful you was to, you were even giving us some scenarios and walking us through some of the things. And it just really did something to me. It was a young lady that was sitting next to me. And while you were talking, she just started crying. And she was boo-hooing. And I'm trying to attend to her. I'm trying to listen to you. And I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, we need this information. And like the young lady would tell me, she said, I've never been able to release tears. And with the information that you were giving us, she felt comfortable enough to be able to just start letting those tears fall, to heal. So I am elated that you are at the table. We're sitting at the table with Mr. Kevin Fischer from NAMI, that's National Alliance of Mental Illness. Yep. And we are so glad that you came to the table. But now that we're in the holiday seasons, let's talk about how we can, this phrase that we're using now, how to protect our peace.
So,
because we're dealing with a lot now.
Oh, absolutely. And this is a tough season. It's a tough season for me. Dominique's birthday is New Year's Day. Wow. And so the holidays are always really tough for me. And Christmas, of course, has always been special. I'm huge into Christmas anyway, but it was made more special because of his birthday. So we spent half his birthdays at Disneyland. Okay. We were Christmas was a big deal for us. And so I struggle every Christmas. Mariah Carey's got a song that says, I miss you most at Christmas time. And I listen to that song and I cry every day because I do. I miss him all the time, but this time of the year is the toughest. So to your question, we have to move past the difficulty of saying no to certain situations. We have to value our self-care enough to understand, first of all, self-care is not selfish.
Yeah.
We have to not let people pressure us into putting ourselves in situations we know are bad for us. I don't do well this time of year. I don't like going to Christmas parties. I'll go to some. I don't stay very long.
Okay.
I struggle. I tell people this, like I said, this time of year and really year round, I have to constantly monitor my mental health, my mental well-being. A lot of idle time is not good for me. I still live with depression, and it's tough for me. And so I've learned to manage my life and situations. And literally, I have conversations with myself that says, Kevin, don't go there today. Yeah. Today's not going to be a good day for you. You can't go to this event or you can't do this thing. So that's my first recommendation is, if you yourself know you have certain triggers, be your own best advocate and don't put yourself in those situations. Just say no. And
a family member wants you to come over and it's tradition, everybody is coming over and you're not feeling it. It's okay to say no.
It's okay to say no.
Without explanation.
Well, exactly. But family members, if you know that you have a loved one who the holidays are particularly difficult for, please be understanding of their saying, no, I can't do the family dinner today, this year, or I can't go to the Christmas party, or I'm not going to drink. Be respectful of that. Don't put people on the defensive, as you just said, where I have to explain or defend why I can't be there. I lost my mama, my father, my child. I'm in substance use recovery. Don't ask me to come to the bar with you. Don't ask me to have a drink as soon as I walk through the door. Yeah. Be respectful of that and don't put people in that situation.
I always tell people no is a complete sentence.
Exactly.
When I say no, that's it.
Well, I was telling you earlier, my wife and I have this Everybody versus Stigma brand. And we started that almost 3 years ago during the pandemic now, because we know one of the great things that came out of the pandemic is more celebrities and public officials are talking about their experience with mental illness. And so we've come out with a bunch of catchphrases, and one of them is, it's okay not to be okay, or you are not alone. And I can tell you, Dominique felt alone in his illness. Often I felt alone as his caregiver. So no matter how many times you say it, when you're in it, you feel, because stigma is isolating. And so we started the Everybody versus Stigma brand. And it sounds, again, a little cliche, because I wanted somebody to know, if you saw somebody wearing the shirt, that I probably understand what you're going through, or I'm somebody that you can talk to about this. And, we have that lived experience. We have to be respectful of not putting people in those situations. Yeah. We also have to do better at being aware of, if a person starts to exhibit symptoms of crisis, you got to know what the resources are available.
And I want you to restate, if you can, the information for the CCBHC.
Yep. Certified Community Behavioral Health Clinics. And like I said, you can Google that, or you can call your local Department of Community Mental Health and they can direct you. And I want to stress something I said about CCBHC as well. I said that they will provide high quality care regardless of severity of diagnosis. I want to explain that. And with all due respect to our mental health professionals out there, there are some who will do what we call cherry pick.
Yeah.
I don't want the very difficult cases. I want the mild to moderate. And so there are some, when we talk about those long waiting lists, because there are some, especially for youth and adolescent, who say, I don't want the schizophrenia and the bipolar and the schizoaffective and all of that. CCBHCs can't pick and choose. They can't cherry pick.
So when a case come in, it's just automatically sent out to a counselor, and they get what they get.
Well, they evaluate you. Well, here's the thing. You don't have to go out. So if, for example, CNS Healthcare, the Guidance Center, for example, Guidance Centers downriver, they are CCBHCs.
Okay.
When you show up to their door, that's where you get treatment. They don't send you someplace else.
Okay.
They're the provider.
Okay.
So that's why I said you're not doing that 6-month wait list. No, they will get you an appointment much sooner. I think the requirement is within 2 weeks.
Okay.
But often it's much less time than that. I have the privilege of working with a lot of these people and, or these organizations, and people will call me and they get same day service. I can pick up the phone and call Higuera in Livonia, which is another CCBHC. I can pick up the phone and say, there's a family in crisis right now. It's 2:00 in the morning. I'm sending them your way. And they're like, Mr. Fisher will be standing at the door when they get here. And they get assessed and treated right then. But that's the point. We have to know where the resources are in our community. We also have what we call them crisis centers, but they're the equivalent to behavioral health urgent cares. Yeah. We need to know where they are in our community. Higuera runs a location called COPE, and I forget the acronym right now, COPE, but it's an urgent care, and it's in Livonia, right at 96 in Farmington. They're open 24/7, 365. If you have a family member or even yourself, someone who you think is in crisis, you take them there and they assess right there on the spot and get that person the help that they need.
I didn't realize how many mental health cases that we had until I started working for Henry Ford Hospital, Maine. Mm-hmm. And the amount of patients that came through the ER that was having mental health setbacks was astonishing.
Hospital emergency departments are typically the front door, the first responders for people who are experiencing psychiatric crisis. Yeah. The problem is, and I have great
I don't really like the way that they deal with them.
Well, I was just getting ready to say, here's the problem, and I got friends.
It makes me so mad.
I have friends in the Michigan Hospital Association. First of all, I don't recommend that people take people who are experiencing behavioral health crisis to the emergency departments. Many of them either don't have the staff for them and frankly don't want you there. Yeah. And I say this with respect to the folks because I work with people in the hospital community, but as an advocate, I have to be honest. There are many who don't want you there or they don't have the staff to deal with you. And that's why we're starting to see more of these crisis centers being developed. Detroit Wayne is going to open one early next year, and I think they're downtown Detroit at 707 Milwaukee. They're going to open a complete crisis center, I think at 7 Mile, right near the Southfield Freeway. Okay. There are Oakland Community Health Network just opened one for families. There are more and more coming online. And we need those because those are better options than the emergency departments. Yeah. And until the emergency departments, frankly, become staffed and more willing to provide treatment to people who are experiencing behavioral health crisis, I don't recommend that people go there. I just don't.
Because even when I was working at the Maine Hospital, I think we only had 5 or 6 beds in the back, tucked in a corner. And they were like, it's a revolving door. Yeah. They will hurry up and kind of, I don't want to say stabilize you, but enough to kick you out. A couple of hours and you're out.
One of the problems that law enforcement officers have, and we go through this when we do the CIT training, is they tell us their frustration is they'll take someone to the emergency department because that's all
1 hour later, they're back out.
And they say, look, we see the people walk out the door while we're still sitting in the car doing the paperwork. Yep. And so we are working on that, and there are solutions to that. There's something called the sequential intercept map model, where we try to provide service to people along this continuum of care. First of all, we want to be proactive. And I can't stress this enough to family members who know you have someone who's experiencing a behavioral health issue. Be proactive. I know it's not easy. We have a tendency to want to look the other way and say, it'll just go away. He'll calm down. Ray was always a little different. Those kinds of things. Mental illness is a medical diagnosis, and like any other medical issue, The more you ignore it, the worse it's going to get. It's not going to go away. And before a person, let's talk about crisis. Let's talk about the situations we put law enforcement in.
Yeah.
Before a person reaches crisis level, you want to help them. You want to intervene as early as possible so you don't have to call the police. Because again, with all due respect
But when you do call the police, make sure you give that bit of information.
You want to ask for a CIT trained officer to respond. I just had an emergency 3 nights ago. A news reporter reached out to me, and it was a situation. This one required police response because the gentleman who was in crisis mentioned that he had a gun.
Yeah.
But I called the local police department, explained it, and I knew they had CIT trained officers. And so I was specific with the dispatch. I said, I'm requesting CIT trained officers do a welfare check.
Yeah.
And that situation turned out very well. I followed up the next day and found out that the gentleman was petitioned, which means the law enforcement officers found that he was experiencing behavioral health crisis. They took him to the community mental health, and he's getting treatment. So it works. But if you have someone, if you call the police, so we have 988 and 911.
Yeah.
If there's no immediate danger to self or others, call 988.
Yes. Yes.
If a person has a weapon, frankly, and if they are
911.
If they're a danger to themselves or other, you call 911. You can still call 988 because if you tell the operators at 988 that the person has a weapon, because they're going to ask you, then they're going to dispatch it to 911 too. But if you call 911, ask for a CIT trained officer.
That's
to
great
respond.
information to know.
Yep.
Great information.
Yep.
Matter of fact, we just saw something on the news. I'm not sure if it was today or yesterday. My days are running together. Where a mother took her children, kidnapped her children that she did not have custody of, and I love that they were able to resolve that with her getting some mental health help.
And they were there for a long time. So one of the things that we provide during that training is we tell officers time is on your side.
Yes.
You're not getting paid by the minute, and so if you stay there as long as it takes. And again, Chief White and all of the other agencies that participate or who have embraced CIT, they get this. They don't tell the officers, well, you got to resolve that call in 15 minutes and go on to the next one. You stay there until you get it resolved. And if you have to stay there and talk for 18 hours, then you do that. I was with State Police spokesman Michael Shaw. You always see him on the news whenever. So I was with him a few weeks ago, and he was reminding me of a situation.
That's the short one, the short guy? Okay.
So, well, he's not as short as he looks, and I got to be nice to Mike because he might hear this.
Okay.
But
hit my 5'3", 5'4".
He reminded me of a situation not long ago, and I saw it on social media. And to be honest, I didn't know if it was real or not, and I certainly didn't know it happened here in Michigan. But there was a call for a lady who was experiencing suicidal ideation, and she was going to jump from
I was just
overpass.
going to bring that up.
They got on the radio and lined up semi trucks so she couldn't jump. That's unheard of. But they did that. Michigan State Police did that. They executed that here in Michigan, where they got on CBs or radios or whatever they did, and they got a convoy of trucks to line up across the freeway so she could not jump to her death.
Now, what went wrong with and I know you can't really say, but the young lady who was on the ledge, I don't know, 16 hours?
They talked to her for 18 hours, and I wasn't there. I don't know. Well,
but why wasn't nothing that put in place where, even the blow up things? Yeah. I know because of the height that she was, it probably still wouldn't have ended well.
Yeah,
but
I was actually out of town when that happened, so I wasn't there. It's interesting because I received a couple calls about it while I was out of town. But my understanding is that Detroit police was on scene for 18 hours trying to talk her down. And what I heard, and I want to be careful about this, is that there is some dispute about did she jump or did she slip?
Okay.
And it ended up resulting in her
Yeah,
death.
yeah.
So I don't know for sure.
But 18 hours is a long time to stand there because, I mean, I was in ROTC in high school. And standing in them formations, after so many hours, your legs do bolt. You know.
Exactly. Well, but to me, that shows the commitment to the law enforcement agency.
Yeah.
Because somebody could have tried to shortcut it. Somebody, that shows the commitment. And so I encourage people, get to know your law enforcement agency better. And I see it both ways. I'd like to see law enforcement agencies and officers get back to more community policing and getting to know people in the community. And I know a lot of great cops. I do.
I think it was a couple of months ago, if I'm not mistaken, you had quite a few of the different police chiefs. We had Farmington, I think we had Livonia, we had Southfield, we had Detroit, we had the sheriff department. We all came together and they had a conversation at the Southfield Civic Center.
Yep.
And that was one of the things that was expressed, getting back to community policing and allowing those lines to cross, of the different cities.
We need to do more of that because I'm telling you guys, and I'm comfortable saying this as a black man, if I need to put that disclaimer out there. I know a lot of really good cops. Most of the cops that I know are good people who are trying to get it right. I've
been in this field for 32 years, and I cannot say that I've ever ran across a bad officer. At least in Detroit Police Department. I haven't.
I've met a joke or two.
No, what I'm saying is where it's gotten to the place where they've crossed the line.
Yeah.
Now, you run into a couple that may have a little attitude or a little chip on their shoulder, but nothing to the effect where they have crossed the line when it comes to the way that they treat citizens per se.
Yeah. Well, so I say, and again, I've had this conversation many times with law enforcement officers across the country. I say, you know what? You have 3 what I call get out of jail free cards, and this is not politically correct, and I know I'm gonna get a call about this. But typically, if officers hurt somebody, the first thing they say is, "I feared for my life."
Yeah.
I was following my training.
Yeah.
Or the person failed to follow my commands.
Yep.
And this gets back
Top 3.
Yep. And this gets back to that hearing voices exercise I was telling you about. I said, there's a difference in me being defiant to your command or my inability to follow your command.
Yep.
And then I challenge officers to say, how necessary was the command? When we have the hands-on role plays, when we at the CIT training, sometimes, like I said, we set these role plays up purposefully to trigger officers too. And sometimes it's a person, an officer will walk in and we're pacing, we're pacing around a tree or something. And an officer will want to come stand right here.
Right here.
Well, what difference does it make? And that's the question we have.
Can they still hear you?
Exactly.
Do you still have a clear,
Well, here's the thing. Let's put it in context. First of all, you got a call, and this scenario is a person walking in the park saw me, let's say it's me, out there pacing and talking to myself. And that person is concerned that I'm experiencing a mental health crisis. So they called you. Okay, you responded, but pacing and talking to myself is not a crime.
It's not a crime.
So your command for me to come stop and stand next to you is not necessary. If I'm pacing, pace with me.
And I was saying that a lot of mental health people don't stand still.
Yeah, they can't.
They can't. Yeah.
They can't. Dominique used to fidget with his fingers all the time. He couldn't be still. So for me to sit here and keep trying to put my hand on top of his hand, be still, why? He's not hurting me.
Yeah.
He's not hurting himself. He's not a danger to himself or anybody else. So again, we put them in these scenarios to say, okay, was that command necessary?
Yeah. Yeah.
Did you have to come in yelling, you were called because I'm standing on the bridge at Belle Isle and you think I'm trying to, take my own life. So showing up screaming at me is probably not going to help.
It's not going to get the result you want.
And so, but it's amazing how the officers respond to that. That program, and I'm trying to be careful because CIT is more than training. Mm-hmm. It really is. It's a community program. And if people went to the CIT International website, they would see that on there. It's training for officers, but it's also engaging with the community. CIT is required to have what we call a public steering committee. Okay. It's almost like an oversight committee that reviews all of the behavioral health runs for that month or that quarter or whatever. And what were the outcomes? How many people got help? How many people went to jail? How many people got hurt? How can we respond better? Were there situations where the use of force was not necessary? Mm-hmm. How do we get better at that? Now, it's a continuous improvement process. Now,
I know that federally or, through the state, it's not required that officers get CIT training. However, can the chief of police require their executive team to go through the training?
Yep. It's individual, and it comes down to the mayor, chief of police, or whatever, saying we're going to implement this in our community. And I encourage your listeners, you should call your local law enforcement agency and say, do we have CIT trained officers? And make sure it's the full 40 hour, not the 4 hour, not I took a quiz online. Do you participate in the full 40 hour CIT training? If not, why not? And how do we make that happen in our community? Because again, not only has it proven to reduce injury to officers and civilians, but it ends up saving money because guess what? Now the police aren't getting sued as much. Mm-hmm. Your bond ratings get better. Mm-hmm. Your lost time injury gets better. All of that
These
stuff
people going
better.
In front of the judge, and
exactly.
And it's mental health. So it's not. I remember. I'm gonna tell this story real quick. I remember working with a partner, and by him having been in a service before, I knew he was battling some, PTSD. Mm-hmm. And because we came across this mental health person, individual, numerous times, I remember being at the hospital, and of course the nurses was tired of him checking himself in and out. And their directive, as soon as he came through the door, was put him out. And it was like, why? Let the doctor make that decision. You don't have the right to make that decision. Yep. So my partner was to the point where he was sick of him. So, he grabbing him. The guy is on a cane, and, he pushed him out, shoved him. And the young man fell. Mm. I was a little agitated because I'm like, let me just deal with it. Yeah. I'll deal with it. Because I had gotten a rapport with he was homeless. Mm-hmm. The gentleman, he would only come in a lot of times to ask, can he have $1? And I would always give him $1. It didn't bother me none.
Exactly.
I was making enough money to get this man $1. Yeah. He pushed him down. And I remember getting off duty. And I remember my lieutenant asking me, can he talk to me? And I knew what it was about. Mm-hmm. I'm saying this for a reason. I knew what he wanted to talk to me about. And he asked me, he said, did anything, strange happen on your shift? And I'm like, nah. He said, well, did anything happen where, one of the mental health individuals, got shoved or pushed or knocked down? Mm-hmm. And I'm like, I said, I don't want no parts of that. Yeah. I said, I don't want to, And he was like, well, I've already called your union person. I need you to make a statement. And I'm like, God dang it. So, we always think we're, 10 steps ahead of them, So, they ask, however many questions they want to ask, and you be as
specific as possible. Yeah.
Well, no, you just, you don't give too much information.
Okay. Concise.
Yeah. Did this happen? Yes. Don't go to explain it, and all this stuff. And, he read my stuff and he was like, mm-mm. So, he went back and redid the questions, and it was like, ask the question, but now explain. And I was so angry. Because I had this conversation several times prior to with my partner. If you get to the point where you're frustrated or irritated, let me handle it. It's not an ego thing. Yeah. Take your ego out of it. That's what, partners do. They bounce off each other. Yeah. And I say that because a lot of times we get in situations that we don't have to be in. Mm-hmm. And then you drag other people into your situation. Mm-hmm. And now now we got to ride with each other for 8 hours and we're not talking to each other. We have to learn how to allow the people who are in the perimeter to deal with the situation if they can.
So at the CIT training, and unfortunately it's become an issue where there are senior officers, or let's say I'm a sergeant or lieutenant, but the CIT trained officer is new. And one of the things that we stress, and I know specifically at Detroit Police, if it is a mental health, if it's a crisis call, and if there's a CIT officer on scene, that CIT officer takes control, regardless of rank, because of exactly what you're saying. You got to let the person who's best qualified deal with the situation instead of you saying, I got seniority, I outrank you, I'm all of it. No, like you said, check your ego at the door. And let's resolve this as peacefully as we possibly can.
Yes.
And I want to go back to your example there in the hospital, because we're going to be rolling out a program the first of the year here in Michigan called NAMI Provider. NAMI Provider is training for hospital employees, primarily emergency department employees, to help them better understand how to manage people who come into the EDs who are experiencing behavioral health crisis. And there's a video that I have, and it's actually very old because Provider's been around for like 15 plus years. But it shows a homeless man in a hospital emergency department, and they're trying to do their normal triage. They're trying to get his blood pressure and all of this stuff. And so they show it through the lens of the nurse and the doctors in the emergency department. And to them, he's being combative. They're trying to get him. He got all his little belongings in a bag, and they're trying to get him to just set the bag to the side and, let us take your blood pressure and this kind of stuff. And he's resisting. And the whole time the nurse is yelling, just calm down, just calm down. So then they roll it back and they play it with the man narrating. And one of the things that he says in the tape, he's like, never in the history of the world has screaming calm down ever calmed anybody down. He was like, if I could be calm, I would. In his mind, you're trying to restrain him. You're trying to get him to sit up on the gurney. You're trying to get him to let you put the blood pressure cup on. Well, to him, you're restraining him. You're trying to get him to set his belongings down. He's like, this is all I got in the world.
And he's guarding it with his life.
You're stealing my stuff. And so NAMI Provider helps emergency room departments see it through the lens of the person who's experiencing the crisis.
Because a lot of restraining and the restraints we use don't have to use them.
Exactly. And so it's,
I like that.
It's all, again, it's about de-escalation. It's about verbally de-escalating. It's about talking, explaining to a person, Mr. Fischer, we want you to put this down just for 1 second because we want to check your blood pressure to make sure you're okay. It's that kind of thing. Instead of yelling, calm down, and you pulling my arm, and now we fighting. And the next thing you know, you call in hospital security because the nurse is saying, well, he's being combative or he hit me. And it's like,
I didn't hit you. And now it's a debate back and forth.
Exactly.
Let me ask you a question, and because I really want to make sure that this is on. This is taped. When we talk about this time of the year, and we think that suicide rates skyrocket.
So here's the facts about this. People do struggle during the holidays. There's more depression, anxiety. There's even an increase in suicidal ideation. But the fact of the matter is, winter is when we experience the lowest rates of suicide. Suicide rates increase in the spring, and they're highest in spring and summer, April through August. And a psychiatrist helped me understand this years ago. And again, this is fact. This is not my opinion. People experience suicidal thoughts through the holidays, but they don't have the energy to act because it's dark outside. And we don't have the energy. The problem is in the spring when we flip from daylight savings time and there's more sunlight and all of that, then people have the energy to carry through those actions.
The spring and the summer, you got vitamin D, so that's giving you the energy.
So we have to be really careful about those myths. It's still something you want to be on guard about. And if you know somebody, again, who's having a tough time during the holidays, invite me out for coffee. You know, one of the things that I experienced personally, I still have people who, and I think it's good intentions, who won't say Dominique's name in my presence. They won't acknowledge his birthday, New Year's. And it's not malicious. They think they're being protective. They think they're being respectful. Well, I might be thinking, why not? You know it's his birthday.
Yeah.
You know what? You can say his name.
Let's
it's
celebrate
okay.
him. Yeah.
Yeah. And so if you know somebody who's struggling, one of the best things you can do is come to me and say, Kevin, I know this is a tough time of the year for you. How you holding up?
Yeah.
Let's go out for a coffee.
That's so important. That's so important. My mom passed some couple of years ago. Her birthday is in November. So her birthday is either on Thanksgiving or a couple of days after Thanksgiving, like it was this year. Thanksgiving is always on a Thursday. This year, my mother's birthday was on a Sunday. So we had to get past Thanksgiving. Then we had to get past her birthday. Then we have a little break. And then now it's Christmas. You know, and I go into this little thing where I don't want to talk. You know, now I'm very active on social media, but to pick up the phone and call someone and converse, it's just too much energy that I don't have. And people get mad at me.
Well, and to your point, people have to understand just because you're active on social media doesn't mean you're being social. It's two different things.
Two different things.
I am, you know, people see me as a very outgoing public person. In a lot of ways, I'm very private. And, you know, I am blessed with the best wife. And, you know, I asked God for help and he sent it to me. My wife is extremely tolerant of me. And I don't even think that's the right term. She's understanding. She knows when I'm struggling. She gives me space when I need to just be left alone. She holds my hand when I need my hand held. When we lost Dominique, because this is my second marriage, when we lost Dominique, I remember my wife coming to me, and we weren't married yet, and she said, I've never lost anybody this close to me. She hadn't lost a grandparent. She hadn't lost, her parents are still living. She said, I don't know how you feel. I don't know what to do. You may have to tell me what you need, but whatever you need, I'm here for it. And she has done that.
I love it.
Every single day. And she doesn't say things to me. Sometimes I don't need to hear the words. She'll just come and put her hand on my hand. And we'll sit there, watch TV or watch the game. Don't say a word.
I love it.
But she gives me what I need.
Mr. Fisher, you're going to have to come back to the table.
Absolutely.
This was an awesome conversation, and I hope our viewers got some information that they didn't have before. I hope they reach out to these different organizations that you have laid out. I just can't thank you enough because it's needed.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity.
After the new year, you know, we're going to have to do this again.
I would love to come back. If I could, for your listening audience, if you have questions about anything, you can contact my office at 517-485-4049.
We'll put it in the chat too.
Okay, yeah, because unfortunately, I'm rarely there. My office is in Lansing. I live here in Metro Detroit. I'm always traveling, so I'm never there. And if there's something you need to talk to me specifically about, you can let my staff know. And they're really good at passing information on to me. And I promise you, I will reach out to you.
We're going to have them back at the table. We are out of time. Next week, we will see you at the table. It's our Christmas show. We got a singer.